This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Dr. Doug Smith, and it's time for our daily podcast. Again, we try to keep these down to, 10, 12, 15 minutes and make them brief and straight to the point. Please, if you like what you're hearing, share with everybody you know, put it on your social media, subscribe to us, like us, do everything you can to help build the what we're trying to accomplish here. Um, before we move on, I want to go back to the beginning. So before we move on, let's go back to the beginning, okay? Because we're doing right now what I call the big three. This is what I call the big three. Gunn from 1963, Akira Brody from 1968, Dell from 1990. Those are the big three. Gunn, Akira Brody, and Dell. Okay, because those are the big three that really set the stage. If you want to know where the wheels came off the bus, if you want to know where the train came off the rails on this opioid crisis, then you got to understand the big three and what those studies are telling us. Gunn, 1963, Akira Brody, 1968, and the one we're looking at in more depth today, Dell from 1990. Remember, before you can get to the right answer, you got to ask the right questions. If you're not asking the right question, you're not going to get to the right answer. You must ask the right question. And that's all we're doing here with the Gunn study and the Akira Brody study. Gunn in 1963 did a very simple thing. Okay, the study itself is huge. We posted it on our website. It's absolutely enormous. It'll take you days to read it and years to understand it. But a lot of what Gunn did really doesn't apply. Okay, we just zeroed in on the one thing that Gunn did. Gunn took 6 rats, put them into 2 days of opioid withdrawal, took out their adrenal glands, the small glands that sit on top of the kidneys, where adrenaline is made and stored. Okay, I think everybody has a pretty good idea what adrenaline is. If not, Google's right there. But you know what adrenaline feels like. And those of you who have been in opioid withdrawal definitely know what adrenaline feels like. But Gunn took 6 rats, put them into opioid withdrawal, and then compared their adrenal glands to normal rats that hadn't been in opioid withdrawal. And Gunn found that after 48 hours of opioid withdrawal, half the contents of the adrenal glands were gone. They weren't there. Okay, that's not an answer, that's a question. What happened to the adrenaline? Was it not made? Did it leak out? Was it destroyed? What happened to the adrenaline? Where did the adrenaline go? What happened? Okay, so that's the Gunn 1963 study, one of the big three. We then move on to Akira Brody, 1968, and Akira Brody simply did very similar, but they found that the metabolites of the adrenaline were in the bladder, in the urine. Okay, so Akira Brody's like, how did this get here? Okay, now here's something I got to tell you. You got to know this. In order for the adrenaline to be metabolized, it had to be in the body. It had to get out of the adrenal gland and get into the body. Okay, so somehow half the adrenaline got out of the adrenal glands, got into the body, and it was metabolized. Metabolism is what we call it when something gets broken down, and the kidney, the kidney's smart, but it doesn't have a brain, and so what the other organs do is they stick a marker on whatever they want to throw away. When the kidney goes, oh, there's one of our markers, they throw it in the urine, and that's how it works. And so the marker on the adrenalines is a methyl group, and then what's thrown into the urine is called methanephrine. And so you'll see in the Akira Brody that the urine was full of methanephrine, predominantly from epinephrine. So now what we have is 1963, hey, opioid withdrawal, half the adrenal gland is now empty. Hey, 1968, yeah, but the bladder is full of metabolized adrenaline. Pretty much tells you what happened. But then it was Dell. That's where we are now. It was Dell in 1990 that gave us conclusive evidence. And Dell used a thing called direct observation. He had a hunch he must have had a hunch. I didn't talk to him. He must have had a hunch something was sideways with the adrenal gland. He must have had a hunch. Because what he did was he took the mice into the operating room and he opened them up. He opened up their bellies and isolated their adrenal gland so he could see it. More than that, he isolated the nerve going into the adrenal gland and put a measurement on it, a meter on it, so he could measure it. He had a pretty good idea what he was looking for. And then once Dell had these mice, he put anesthetized, under anesthesia, and in his little operating suite. I don't know how in the world you isolate the adrenal gland on a mouse. I could not even imagine. But he did it, and he hooked the nerve up to a little meter, and then he put the little mouse into withdrawal. Now that he's got everything ready, okay, he's looking right at the adrenal gland. He's looking right at the nerve going to the adrenal gland, and he puts him into withdrawal by giving him Narcan, naloxone. And immediately they go into withdrawal. And what Dell sees, and this is why I call this the big three. This is the big moment. This is the aha moment. What Dell saw is that the nerve controlling the adrenal gland surged by 400%. Activity in the nerve controlling the adrenal gland increased by 400%. Now, other nerves changed, but the one we're specifically focusing on right here and right now is the nerve to the adrenal gland. It surged 400%, and simultaneous with that 400% surge in nerve activity was a 20-fold increase in epinephrine levels. Dell gave us the answer. Dell gave us the answer. He looked at it with his own eyes. Direct observation. And what he saw was when the little mouse went into opioid withdrawal, the nerve controlling the adrenal gland went haywire. It just went haywire. A lot of nerves went haywire. Okay? A lot of nerves went haywire. Specifically, what we're looking at here is a nerve to the adrenal gland. Why was half the adrenaline gone? Because the nerve going to the adrenal gland had gone haywire and it had secreted all the half the adrenaline. Okay? Not normally. This is an abnormal secretion of adrenaline. And adrenaline will kill you. Okay? Abnormal secretions of adrenaline will kill you. This is dangerous stuff. And this was 1990. This was dangerous stuff. OxyContin had not been approved. It had not been approved by the FDA. And here we are in 1990, and we're looking at some really dangerous stuff. Hey, when you go into opioid withdrawal, you lose control of your adrenal gland. That's what this says. Hey, when you go into opioid withdrawal, you lose control of your adrenal gland. Okay, that should have prevented the approval of OxyContin right there. Now, it didn't, because in 1992, funding for research got switched over from NIH, National Institute of Health, over to NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, and they're big proponents. They are the proponents of the dopamine theory of addiction, the brain disease model of addiction, which ignores the adrenal gland, which is why none of y'all have ever heard of it except for us. Okay, they have this theory that's all in the head. Problem is, if you're going to believe, or if you're asked to believe the dopamine theory of addiction or the brain disease model of addiction, you're asked to ignore the big three. You're asked to ignore the study by Gunn. You're asked to ignore the study by Akira Brody. You're asked to ignore the study by Dell. You're asked to ignore these studies. And you can't do that in science. It's not the way science is done. It's not proper science. And for the psychiatrist to ask you to ignore this science is not right. For the addiction specialist to ask you to ignore this science is not the way science is done. Okay, we're doing science the way it should be done. You first raise the question and then you look for the answer. We're doing it the right way. That's not how they did it. They basically have a solution looking for a problem. The solution being the brain disease model of addiction. And they've applied that to you guys inappropriately, in my opinion. So we're going to hold here for today. Okay, we're going to continue to stress and emphasize this point. Next week, we're going to start looking at Chang. Chang basically replicated the Delle study, which is very important in science, very important to replicate, very important to show that when you do it a second time, you get the same results. But Chang also went a step further and showed that when you take out the adrenal glands, when you surgically ablate the adrenal gland, just got them, you don't get that surge in epinephrine. So the level of answers that we're getting here is just getting deeper and deeper. But please go back and listen again to the recordings from this week. Make sure you understand the questions that are raised by the Gunn study and the Akira Brody study, and then make sure you understand at least what answers we're beginning to see with the Delle study. Everybody have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.